Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Lori Clark Show. This episode of my podcast is brought to you with the help of Zoom Us, a video and audio conferencing interface. It's important to know that I'm in no way sponsored by Zoom. I just want to tell you how much I love it. It is very reliable, easy to use, and provides excellent audio and video files that my team and I produce to share the power of story with you. Another non-sponsored, couldn't do without, but just have to tell you how good it is Squarespace. When they say it is the all-in-one platform, it really is true. I go into the back end of my website multiple times a day, adjust things, post podcast, add links, and look at our show's analytics, which all sync across my devices. And when I need an image, Squarespace provides an excellent resource that's powered by Unsplash. Now for my most favorite feature, the Squarespace app. Being a working mom, there never seems to be enough time in my day. So when my daughter's in ballet, I sit in my car and upload, post, and manage everything on my website from the app. It's really cool and seamless. Squarespace is really, really simple and very dedicated to helping me create a brand of excellence. So with that, big shout out to Zoom, Squarespace, and Unsplash. Thank you for helping me tell people's stories. With that said, let's move on to the best part about today, the show. Please allow me to welcome my next guest on The Lori Clark Show. Trish Wagner is a high school teacher of 32 years, mother of 3 young adults who teaches and studies emotional literacy, understanding the psychology of how we can learn through recognizing our emotions by developing awareness through mindfulness and use emotion to bring forward our best selves in all aspects of how we love, live, teach, and parent. Everyone, I would like to welcome you and introduce you to Miss Trish Wagner. Trish, you are going to talk to us about nurturing emotional courage today. And I have to say to you, like I said to you earlier on, I'm in 6 hours deep into this research. I can't get enough. Something's happened. Now I've got some emotional courage here myself. So this is brilliant. And thank you for wanting to do this show with me today.
It's my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me, Lori. It's pretty exciting to be talking to somebody who is a kindred spirit in the field, for sure.
So great. It's so great. Now, I have been talking to my audience and our future audience and saying, look, we are going to direct this to teens, to young women, to young men about how to lean in to the discomfort of that big emotion when you feel it, and what to do about that. Because a lot of times our survival mode, Trish, our first response is to run for the hills.
Yeah.
And we are talking today with your wisdom, your knowledge, and what you've learned through your own experiences, but we're also going to tap into a few people that are your favorites who talk about this, and we're going to continue the conversation with their work and the work that you've done. So what is and how do you nurture emotional courage?
Well, it's a loaded question, right? Because it's so many layers of how we nurture emotional courage. Obviously, it has to begin in the home, right? It begins with parents. It begins with attachment, which I'm sure many of your listeners are familiar with, the understanding that we are wired for connection. And when a child does not learn from their attachment figure that they are safe, then their system eventually becomes dysregulated. So it's biological, it's psychological, it's emotional, and spiritual. So we often talk about the biopsychosocial spiritual model in counseling, which of course I'm a month or two away from finishing my master's in counseling. So it's one of those things where I just constantly am reminded about the multi-layers of how do we nurture emotional courage? How do we grow it? How do we help kids to thrive, right? And in so doing, help ourselves too. So, you touched on daring greatly with Brene Browns' work, right? And that leaning into the discomfort that she talks about. It's really important information. I think Brene Brown speaks to every woman I know that I speak about this with, mostly women, are very passionate about her work. And I think that one of the reasons it is because she's so incredibly authentic and honest and vulnerable, is her favorite word. And I love how she describes emotion of vulnerability. So she describes vulnerability in Brene Brown's words as uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure, right? So let's just think about those three words for a minute. Uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure. You're a teen and in a situation where life is, throwing you a curveball, as if you're going to want to lean into uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure, right? These are scary, scary topics. And so one that, you and I, as women who feel safe and have good connections, oh yeah, I can lean into the discomfort. I can have that vulnerable conversation with Lori. But I think it's really important for us to recognize how difficult that can be for so many people, not just teens, but anybody who's experienced trauma. You're asking them to lean into uncertainty when their whole world is uncertain, right? So from a biological standpoint, uncertainty and risk and exposure means physical hurt, can mean emotional hurt, can mean sexual abuse, right? It can mean all of those layers. So why would I trust anybody, right?
Well, and why would I lean into it?
Why would I lean into
leaning into it? Means
as far away from that as possible.
Yeah, like I'm running. Leaning in means get me deeper into this relationship.
So how do we get there?
Yeah.
Right? So how do we get there with kids? And the only way you get there with any human being is through careful, loving, safe, trusting relationships. That's it. And you don't have to have your doctorate or your master's or anything else to know that is common sense, right? So that's why it's so important that parents learn this stuff, but also teachers. And if we cannot, I always use the bucket analogy, if we cannot fill our own buckets, then we cannot nurture emotional courage. So it has to begin with us, right? It has to begin with myself, with you, Lori, which is the work you're doing. I can't support kids if I'm stressed out, if I feel threatened, if I'm worried about my marriage, I'm worried about my own children. My bucket begins to empty. And then I'm giving, my bucket empties, I'm filling everybody else up, but I'm not filling my own bucket. So we have to begin with ourselves in understanding how to nurture emotional courage. And it starts with mindful self-compassion.
So your bucket for let's say someone's 14.
Right.
And they're like, well, what's a bucket?
Right. So what's a bucket? A bucket is how I feel about myself, right? What is my self-worth? What is my view of self-worth? So, let's talk a little bit about what you and I have discussed before, the difference between self-esteem and self-worth, right? Because these are really important topics. When I was a young parent in the 90s, I was having my kids and I was the victim almost of the self-esteem movement. And it was all, well-intentioned by psychologists saying, yes, we need to build children's self-esteem. And now here we are in the 2000s, and we're beginning to realize that there was a failed scheme here, because in building someone's self-esteem, what we were teaching them is that you need to compare yourself. It's that sense of a global evaluation of self-worth in Dr. Kristin Neff's words, right? This global esteem of self-worth. So people look at me and then I judge myself. I say, am I good or am I bad? Do I fit? Do I fit here? And so
sorry, but then what happens is, so your bucket is beliefs, it's values,
correct,
it's self-perception.
Yeah.
And could your bucket be fear, like those kinds of things too?
Yeah, your bucket's going to have all of your emotions in it. Your bucket is what is that whole biopsychosocial spiritual that I was talking about. It's all of those things within your bucket, right? And so you need to make sure you look after your body, right? That biological nourishment. You need the physical nourishment, right? But then you need the psychological nourishment. You need the relationships, the constant connection between you and other social beings, right? You need a spiritual connection, that sense of, there's something other than me, that, I am part of consciousness, but I don't direct consciousness, and I'm not the center of consciousness, as, I hear so much, like Dr. Sam Harris, who's the Waking Up app, wrote the book Waking Up. Same kind of thing. He talks about consciousness and how when we believe we're at the center of consciousness, it can give us a false sense of where we fit in the world. We're not at the center. We are literally part of it, always ever changing, right? Nothing is permanent, right? So when we look at that, that's important to understand that.
And so then as we fill our bucket,
correct,
as we put our bucket out there, let's talk about the whole idea of what Kristin Neff is saying, where she says, and you said this is because you mentioned, okay, once you're moving through this with your bucket, you go into this mindfulness. Right. And in that space of mindfulness, there's a space where self-esteem is here, and there's a space and self-compassion is here as well. Now, interestingly, when I was doing research with her and saw her TED Talk, listened to her TED Talk, I went, hold on. Self-esteem isn't the same as self-compassion? I was like, wait a second.
Yeah.
I really didn't know that. I've always thought it was kind of the same. And then as she walks in and expresses the 3 core components, that was like, oh my gosh, I get it.
Right. So just to kind of clarify a little bit more, because I don't know that I finished my thought on the difference between self-esteem and self-worth. Self-esteem is comparative, right? It's an external locus of control, right? We look at ourselves and how we fit in the world, and then we look at others, and then we decide, I'm here in my grades, I'm here in my promotion, I'm here in my marriage, so I'm doing great, so I should feel good about myself. Versus self-worth and of course self-compassion, as Dr. Neff talks about, is an internal or intrinsic locus of control. So I'm not comparing myself to others. I am looking within and I'm saying, I am a good human being because I am a human being. I am enough. So now you say that to somebody who their whole life have experienced trauma, they don't believe you for a minute, okay? And in my work with my clients, when I was counseling, I was working with people that were, in their 60s and 70s and who felt like they were nothing. They had no self-worth. And so for me to go, okay, well, let's practice talking, I am enough. I am a good person. I am a good friend. Can we talk about who you are and build your sense of, it's so many layers to get to there. That takes patience. And so when I talk to my students about it, they say, oh, that feels narcissistic, Ms. Wagner. It feels like I'm being cocky. And I said, yeah, well, of course, because it's new, right? It's new neural circuitry that you're trying to lay down. And so as Dr. Neff says, there are 3 pieces, right? There's the self-kindness, right? That self-compassion, practicing being kind to yourself instead of beating yourself up like we all do. Oh, I'm such an idiot. Why did I say that? I can't believe I did that. Right. Oh my God, what an awful parent I am. I yelled at my kid. We all do it. Everybody does it. But when we do it regularly, then Dr. Neff reminds us, step back and say, would I say that to my best friend? Step back. Right? So how do you step back, right, when you're doing it? That requires practice through mindfulness, right? So that's why you have to practice mindfulness just like you have to practice tennis or practice soccer. It's thousands of hours of taking the time to try to be present in the moment, to come to your breath. You don't have to close your eyes and go om, right? It's about, okay, stop, recognize what's going on here, observe, expand my awareness to my body and to the people around me, breathe, right? And then respond. So that is so important. That biological piece is crucial, right? So self-kindness doesn't just come like that. You have to be able to slow down, come to your breath, be mindful. That's why she says that's the second piece of self-compassion practice. And then the third piece that Dr. Neff talks about is common humanity, right? So that piece of you are not alone. In the Cracked Up documentary, I was listening to Dr. Bessel van der Kolk today in a Zoom call, and he was talking about you're never alone. Because Daryl Hammond, the SNL actor who's the feature in the film Cracked Up, was saying, oh, you don't need to hear from me. I'm just this broken dude. Let's listen to the doctors, because the doctors know. And Bessel van der Kolk just said to him, no, Daryl. He says, I'm nothing special. He said, you don't need a PhD to know what pain feels like. And you don't need a PhD to understand that you just need connection and love and for yourself as well as others, But you can't, going back to my bucket analogy, you can't begin to give love to others and have healthy relationships until you know how to do that for yourself. Right?
Which then is the self-compassion.
Correct. So it always comes back to that. Everything I've done in my addiction work with people, every single time it came back to that. So what is that about? In each of the cases, when you talk to trauma survivors, they will say to you, I just needed to know somebody cared. I just needed to know somebody wanted to hear my story. Somebody wanted to listen to me and not necessarily tell me what to do, but just hold space for me. Just be there.
I just wanted to be seen.
I just wanted to be seen. Beautiful, right? And tell my story. Daryl Hammond says in the film, his biggest fear was that he would die and nobody would know what he lived through as a child, the horrific abuse. He's like, that was more frightening for me than the actual abuse that happened, is that I would never be seen, that I would never be heard. His illustrious long career in SNL, nobody ever really knew that watching him. They just knew he's a funny guy. So it's interesting, right?
And then this is interesting that you say that, because now let's talk about the critical point of us. Because in this, she talks and says, hey, the self-criticism undermines our motivation because it's a threat. Mm-hmm. So explain this to someone who's 14 years old, 13 years old, 11 years old, and they're saying, I have a learning difference. Mm-hmm. I'm unable to do math. I'm unable to
I'm stupid, actually, is what
I'm stupid. They're not going to say I'm unable to do math. I'm
stupid. I'm such an idiot. Why can't I do math? Everybody else can do math, right? So in Dr. Neff's works, you are both the attacker and the attacked. I just thought that was brilliant when she said that. I'm like,
I just snapped back. I was like, oh.
Right? Yeah. You're attacking yourself, and at the same time you feel attacked for not being able to understand math, right? And so how do you step out of that? Well, this is primal, right? This is a primal reaction. So what I teach my students is this is your brain doing this to you. This is not who you are. This is your brain. So let's talk about what's happening in your brain. Your monkey brain, or some people call it your reptilian brain, is feeling attacked. So your prefrontal cortex, or your rational brain, goes offline. You cannot react rationally when you feel attacked. So how do I then stop feeling attacked? And it has, again, to do with biology. You must come to your breath. There is no other option in those first few seconds, right? And how do you know to come to your breath? My clients would say to me, or my students would say to me, I don't know how to come to my breath. I'm just losing my shit, right? I don't know how to come to my breath. And it's like, that's where the practice comes in. It's a practice. It is not going to happen overnight. Oh, I meditated. Like right now, my students are doing a 30-day meditation challenge with me, right? Well, it's not going to happen after 30 days either, right? It takes a long time. And, if you've read any research on habits, they say 10,000 hours, right? 10,000 hours of practice to become good at something. And what do I mean by good? It's not about doing meditation or mindfulness well. It's not that. It's about forming new neural connections in the brain. The more you do it, the more that pathway, or let's say that highway, gets traveled. And the more the highway gets traveled, the more when that moment comes where I'm in my math class and I feel like my teacher's looking at me like I'm an idiot and they're asking me a question and I feel like I'm being hijacked. Yeah. Like, oh my God, there goes my brain. They call it the amygdala hijack, right? Yeah. Then I can, nobody has to know. Just breathe. Feel your body. Come to your body. Feel what's going on in your body. Is my stomach clenching? Is my heart pounding? All of those things are a biological reaction to you feeling attacked. So then the first thing you do, come to your breath. Once you expand your awareness, then you go to your body, right? Oh, I can feel it here. I can feel it there. Okay, a few more deep breaths, right? A few more deep breaths. And then now the self-kindness comes in. I know this is hard. I know I can do this. Respond. You know what, Mrs. Blank? I actually don't understand that question. I wonder if you could explain it to me, right? But we don't learn those skills. We don't learn those skills. Nobody teaches us those skills. And when I was doing my practicum in my master's, I was meeting people in their 60s and 70s that looked at me and said, oh my gosh, like I've never even heard of anything like that. And, I think Dr. Marc Brackett uses the ruler approach. He talks about the ruler approach. I'm sure you read about it.
Yeah, I did.
Okay, so the ruler is, and I like it, but I actually like the one I just gave you better. So I'll give you both acronyms. Okay. So the ruler approach is recognize your emotion first, recognize what you're feeling, and we'll talk about that in a minute, Dr. Brackett's work, because it's really important in a proactive approach rather than when children are actually traumatized, right? Or people are traumatized. Understand what the emotion means, right? What is that? What is it telling me? Label it. I feel blank. Right? And express the emotion. I am feeling it, say it out loud, and then self-regulate. But what the acronym I was sharing with you is an acronym that is called SOBER, SOBER. And it comes from the Mindfulness-Based Relapse Program, which Dr. Neff's work has been adapted from. Okay? So Dr. Neff took mindfulness-based self-compassion from the original work of mindfulness-based relapse, right? So it originally the work came through trying to help people suffering from addiction. And then she looked at it from a more global perspective and said, let's do, and I can't speak exactly for her because I don't know exactly how that research happened, but I just understand that she became very passionate about helping her own students at university and then doing work with people in general, not just people that are suffering from trauma. And so the SOBER is stop, which is what I was doing.
Yep.
Stop. Observe what's going on in my body. Breathe. Breathe. Expand your awareness to the people around you, what's actually happening is at math class, and then respond. Okay. Right? So SOBER. And I teach my students it, and they say it's very, very helpful to them. But again, it has to be practiced, or else you don't know how to reach into the toolbox, right? Nice to have all these tools.
There might be a teenager out there or someone out there who writes it on a sticky note and just puts it in their book, Yeah, but
it's not going to help. That's the thing. So that's what I want to share with you is like the mindfulness-based program that Dr. Neff has that I know you ordered.
Yes.
Is become the cornerstone of what I want to do in my coursework now with my students because it's brilliant. It's a workbook. You have to work through it. So I started it with my students too late because I only got it in November and then didn't have enough time in the semester to do it. I was doing other coursework with them. And one of my students said, I liked it, madam. It pushed me a little bit. It was a little bit uncomfortable, but you know what? I went on a holiday after that class and I saw it in the airport and I felt like, wow, somebody's calling out to me. So she bought it. And she did the whole program. She kept texting me, even though she wasn't in my class, telling me about it. And then she said to me, I finished it. I love it. I'm so glad that you started us on it, even though I didn't like it at first. She said, I didn't like it. And it was uncomfortable. And a bunch of my students told me it was uncomfortable work. And then she finishes the whole program, does a few other books that we discussed, and she wrote a reflection for me just not too long ago that I shared. I'm happy to share with you too. She said I can share it with anybody, so I can share it with you. And you can put it on your website.
Yeah.
Of a teenager's perspective on doing mindful self-compassion work and how she feels it's changed her life.
Well, and what I find interesting is that I just said to you, oh, well, someone could take that sober and they could put it, in their binder. And you said, no. Because I'm trying to think, oh, yeah, in order to develop the habit, you got to have a cue. But, the reality is, like you're saying, when you can sit there and then your teacher calls on you and you're just like, I don't know.
I don't know. And I don't get it. Or I have to go to the bathroom. Or, anger. This teacher hates me. They're picking on me. All of those things, right? These are all natural responses to when we feel uncomfortable and we don't have the skills for how to deal with being uncomfortable. Because, like Brene Browns talks about, there's nowhere else to live but in the big, ugly, open, uncomfortable world that we have,
Absolutely. And here's a question for you while we're still talking on Dr. Neff. We said here in the notes, she said, we believe we need our self-criticism to motivate ourselves. If we are too kind, then we will be self-indulgent or lazy. We will actually think if we're too kind to ourselves.
Yeah.
So
I love that.
Like we're treating ourselves I'm the best thing ever. Like, yes. And then we immediately begin to, criticize ourselves and go, you're not that amazing person. Like, what's your problem, Lori? You say you're amazing. You say you're solid. You know what? You're not. So again, where is for the person who is developing a skill, is it as simple to say the awareness?
Absolutely.
About your thoughts?
That's the beginning, right? That's the beginning, becoming aware. And really that's what meditation and mindfulness is about. It's about practicing being with what is in the present moment. That's it. It's not about judging it. No. It's just about being with what is. Byron Katie does work she has an amazing piece of work called The Work. And she talks about loving what is. So whenever we fight against what is, we are going to create pain, because what is, right? We can't change the reality of what is, but it's how we look at what is and become aware and then be able to regulate our own selves. It can help. Like, think about the child again, going back to the child living in an abusive home. Right? They can't choose to leave the house. It is what it is. They can choose to get control over their own body and then maybe get the courage to be able to tell a trusted, caring adult this is what they're living in. Sure. Right? But how many kids live in silence their whole lives through abuse?
I was talking to 4 people just before COVID happened, just before spring break. And each of these people, Trish, these are women. We're talking like 40s. There's one that was in her 60s and one was in her 30s. And they all said it at different times to me. Mm-hmm. You know what? There was sexual abuse in our family. And we weren't allowed to talk about it. Nobody talked about it.
That's right. We need to make sure as educators and counselors that kids know about the helplines, the kids' help phones. We need to create safe spaces in our classroom so that they know that you care deeply about who they are. We need to continually ask the questions, how are you? And be ready to hold space to find out how they really are. So this could lead us right into Dr. Brackett's work in the classroom, right? So the mood meter that, he's introduced is being introduced now in the elementary schools, right? And they've been using these zones of regulation and mood meters, these kinds of approaches for some time now. And it's exceptionally beautiful, powerful, important work that he is doing. and that teachers are doing through his work. Because if we can begin to teach kids how to label their emotions and to understand what normal is, that adults that love you are actually not supposed to hurt you. When you're a child, you don't know any different, right? So if you are attached to a person who hurts you, then all you get from that as a child is, there must be something wrong with me, right? Because that's my caregiver. That's the person that gave birth to me. So I'm supposed to be attached to them. And yet this is what they do to me. So those key pieces outside of the home, if that's where the abuse is taking place, has to be in the community. And so we need to begin by teaching kids that emotions matter, by teaching adults how important it is to recognize your own emotions, by making sure that teachers have the proper pedagogy and the proper training to be trauma informed, because we are just beginning this journey of being trauma informed in education. And I'm telling you, we have a long way to go, obviously. But if we care enough about kids, we can help them from the very beginning that they enter into the preschools and into kindergartens, about learning how to recognize emotion, talk about what healthy emotion it means, feeling all emotions, and then learning how to express all of those emotions and learning how to be self-aware, like you said, and practice mindfulness. And they're doing it now with small children, and the earlier the better, as we know, because we're hardwired for connection, right? And I remember, one of the things that I remember Dr. Neff talking about is that, we self-criticize, we beat ourselves up all the time, right? Yeah. And then she talked about, we think then, like you said, that'll put us in our right place, and then maybe we will do better next time, right? I'm an idiot. Why didn't I get that math question? Right. And if I beat myself up, maybe that'll motivate me to do better at work. And we just imperfectionists all the time. And perfectionism is just the double-sided cone of shame, is what Brene Browns talks about. And what we know from the research that Dr. Neff talked about was that actually is the opposite that happens. It actually leads to increased anxiety, increased depression, right? And so she talked about the importance of looking towards the mammalian brain, or what I call the prefrontal cortex. And so developing the connection between our reptilian brain and our mammalian brain, or our monkey brain, or our amygdala, to use proper biological terms, the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex, to strengthen those neural connections, is done through mindfulness and meditation and healthy relationships and learning to come to your breath and yoga and all of the other biological needs we need. Good sleep regimen, right? Eating well, but relationships, social relationships, all of these things are key in bringing us to a place where we can engage our prefrontal cortex, engage that mammalian brain, and say, how do I bring my system back online? Because it's biological, right? Coming back to that.
Because there's a cortisol response. And when there's that cortisol response, then your body responds with adrenaline, right?
Exactly.
And then you're like, and if it's too much, then the body shuts down.
Yeah, and you actually made a point there. The body shuts down too. So we've been talking about the brain, but your CNS, or your central nervous system, is dysregulated when you are in a situation where you feel like you're being attacked, right? And then you're attacking yourself if you're saying self-loathing things. So now you got a double whammy, right? So the parasympathetic nervous system is the part of our nervous system that releases the oxytocin, releases the serotonin, right? Tells us to go. And when we breathe, that's what we do. We activate the parasympathetic nervous system when we deep breathe. When we hyperventilate like this, that's the sympathetic nervous system, and it's releasing more and more cortisol and more adrenaline, or noradrenaline, as it's also referred to. So in order to decrease the sympathetic nervous response and increase the parasympathetic nervous response, which is the nervous response that says breathe and calm down, you have to breathe. Like, it is literally, you have to breathe. You have to deep breathe. You have to slow your breath down, right? And you need, oftentimes when kids are having panic attacks, for example, with some of my students, I would ask them, tell me what is best for you when you're having a panic attack. How can I support you? Because for some of my students, they want me to hold their hands, right? Just hold their hands and breathe with them. Others don't want to be touched, but they would like me to just try to breathe with them. Others want for me to be able to let them step out into the hallway and just stand beside them, right? And so these are important things because, again, teachers are not taught this, by the way, right? Nobody's taught this.
No, this is the thing, right? And here's the thing. I go back to my own childhood as you're talking about this, and when we were at school, right?
Yeah.
But, you've got kids now who are in class. They don't feel like they measure up. They're feeling like they fall short, and their pulse is racing all the time, 6 hours a day. This self-talk, the place that's what's happening in their body, in their mind, and in their spirit. There's a level of grief that I think, as a teenager or as a young child, that they aren't really connected to because, right?
And they're disconnected from their very selves, right, Lori? Like they're disconnected from their own bodies. So this is what goes back again to Dr. Neff's work, is understanding that it begins here, right? It begins inside. It begins with nurturing that emotional courage within us. But we can't do that if we don't have the skills for, first of all, knowing what emotions are, right? Like recognizing emotions from a very young age. I think it was mad, sad, glad in Brene's words were the 3 words that came from her research on the 3 emotions most people know: mad, sad, glad, right? And it's like there are over 2,000 words in the English language that, to quote Dr. Brackett, that recognize emotion. But how many can you name? Like, can you say to me you're feeling despair? So what I regularly do now is I survey my students weekly on a Google survey, so it's anonymous, with the mood meter in it. And then I ask them to answer it right below in a survey. Tell me, what color are you feeling and what's the word that describes how you're feeling today? And then when everybody's responded to the survey, now I pull it up so the whole class can see it on my Zoom call, unfortunately for now, but in real life I do it in the classroom. Yep. And I show them what everybody's saying. Well, what do you think happens as you start to show all of these? Majority of my kids last week were in the green. Okay. And I'm going to be doing it again this Friday. I do Wellbeing Fridays with them. So majority were in the green, but there's a couple in the red. And there were 2 kids who had multicolors across. So they said like 5 different adjectives from 4 different quadrants of Dr. Brackett's mood meter. And, we haven't talked about the mood meter yet in your show. I don't know if you want me to describe it.
I think that's a great idea because I do have it on my Instagram and I've got it on Facebook and I'm putting it on the website for us so that when you can click on the podcast, you can see the read more button. And all of this stuff is going to be including the mood meter. And I would like to say about the mood meter that, this, when I bought it, it said ages 4 and up. Like people can do this. You can
that's my point.
begin to teach your child. And what I like about this is it's not me directed. Like my daughter is 10 and a half and this is a tough time for everybody, right? So when you can connect to this as a family, up to 6 people, and you really don't need to talk about it per se, because this app gives you all of the language. Like she was looking through the words today and said, how do you pronounce? And she couldn't.
Isn't that beautiful?
Well, right? And then I explained what sullen was.
Yes, isn't that great?
She didn't know what sullen was. And it's it's a really great, it's a gateway in.
Well, absolutely.
Emotional intelligence. So please explain to us what this mood meter is.
Okay, so the mood meter, as Dr. Brackett put together, Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence is his work, education. It's all to work with educators, his work, is based on a horizontal and a vertical axis. And so So I'm sure you'll have that in your, there's a short little video that you can watch that I'm sure you'll post there. That's great. What is the mood meter? Yeah. So it's excellent. You can find it on his website. But basically the horizontal axis is pleasantness. So unpleasant to pleasant emotions. And then the vertical axis is energy. energy, low to high energy. When we're in the low energy part of the quadrant, we're in either blue, which is low pleasantness and low energy, or we're in the green, which is high pleasantness and low energy. So for example, in green, we'd find calm, and in blue, we may find depressed. Okay. Then going up the energy axis, you're going to go to high energy. And in high energy, in the top left, you're going to have red. And red is that area where you have high energy and low pleasantness. So this is where anger stems from, but there are so many beautiful words in there. Rage would be much higher in the top left corner, to discomfort and unease would be in the bottom corner right, closer to pleasantness, right? Because it's a spectrum. And then in the top right would be your yellow. And on yellow, you have high energy and high pleasantness. So all of those things then help us to understand, where am I feeling on the spectrum of energy and on the spectrum of pleasantness? And just being able to recognize how you feel and then label it begins then to allow yourself to wonder, okay, what is my goal? What do I want to do today? And how he talks about how goals and emotions are tied together. So, for example, today, I need to be in probably yellow, and so do you, right? Because we're talking about really important things that need our energy. And we need to also be instilling hope in your listeners, right? It's not all doom and gloom, that we have skills, and we can learn these skills right from the age of 3 and 4 years of age, even younger. To teach your children where their anger sits. My girlfriend has a 3-year-old, and I remember her saying to me not too long ago, he was having a little bit of a fit. And the first thing she said to him was, where do you feel it? Where do you feel it, buddy? Where are you feeling that in your body? And I thought, isn't that beautiful that parents are doing these kinds of things now? I didn't know how to say that to my kids. I didn't know to ask my children to tell me where they felt their anger or their joy or their fear, right?
Yeah,
so these are huge life skills, right?
And I think something that's really important, and I wrote it down, is that emotions are a spectrum.
Oh, huge, yeah.
And so when you're feeling, so this is really key, and weigh in here, because it's like this. How are you feeling? I'm angry. Okay, so that's one. It's just one dimensional. It just drops. Mm-hmm. Whereas what this does is it's okay, so but like angry, and where though? And what I like about the app is that it'll say angry or mad, and it'll give you 3 other words attached to that, which is so cool, because you're not in one place.
Right.
You're in multiple places.
Yeah, it gives you the language. And what we've learned through, obviously, psychotherapy is one of the first steps in cognitive behavioral development, cognitive behavioral therapy, which is the most widely evidentially based therapeutic approach in counseling, is that you need to be able to name what's happening. You need to be able to name it, right? And so how do we do that when we don't have the words, right? So we need to name our thoughts. What am I actually saying to myself? What is the behavior that's connected to that? Do I want to continue to yell at my wife every time I get angry, or yell at my mom every time I'm angry, right? And what can I do to change my thoughts? Well, the thoughts are connected to emotion, right? That's the basic, understanding the lyrics in it.
And you know what else too, is that there's an energy and a pleasantness. So it's saying, are you feeling low energy or high energy? Right. And then is it pleasant or unpleasant? And I love that, because
the spectrum,
again, it's just another level of moving us through that. As Brene Browns says, you're moving through the middle. You're wading right dead through, because that is the path of growth. That is the path of awakening. Now, let's talk about Dr. Kessler, his work in finding meaning in the 6th stage of grief.
It was interesting. I haven't studied him too much, except for listening to his pod talk with Brene Brown on her new series, Unlocking Us. But I just thought it was so beautiful, because he talked about the 5 stages of grief, and then he talked about the the sixth stage that now her family posthumously is allowed him to add, which is finding meaning. And I thought that was really beautiful. Understanding that through grief, we have various stages that is, again, it's up and down. It's like a wave of moving through grief. But, I wouldn't say that I'm an expert on the field of his work, but I just think it's really important to recognize that we are collectively grieving as a world right now, right? And he said something that was really profound in the podcast talk with Dr. Brown, and he said, we need to collectively mourn the loss of the world as we knew it. He said he is absolutely convinced that post-pandemic, we will talk about to our children, and our children will talk about to their children, well, before the first pandemic, right? Just like the 1918 flu.
Right.
And so how do we find meaning in such collective suffering? And I mean, we just have to think about different parts of the world that have obviously been hit much harder than us. But it again comes back to emotions too, Lori. I think about Dr. Susan David's work that I talked to you about, the Harvard medical psychologist. She has an amazing TED Talk that kind of inspired our talk today called The Gift and Power of Emotional Courage. And in that TED Talk, she says so many important things. But one of the things that really resonated for my students after we debriefed it in small breakout groups as well as a class was emotions are data, not directives. Right?
I love that.
Emotions are data, not directives. So we need to be able to label those emotions. We need to be able to notice those emotions, be able to breathe through when we're in difficult situations. But we need to also recognize that we do not have to follow what our emotions are telling us. So that's kind of similar to what Dr. Brackett says, which is layering them with your goals, right? Understanding.
Well, and it's also similar to what David Kessler does say. And the one thing, I listened to that same podcast, but the one thing that he said in my research was, he said, we live in a world that doesn't want to allow you to experience grief.
Correct.
And we live in a society that wants you to just get over it.
Right.
And move on. And I'm saying to people, and I said in my IGTV announcement today, I said, look, there are many of you listening who have loss in your family because your parents are divorced.
Right.
Or maybe you're being bullied and you've lost your friend group. You lost faith in people. Or maybe, your relationship is just falling apart and you don't know what to do now. There's a loss. Yes. And maybe you've lost yourself.
Correct.
And so he walks that through. But again, it goes all the way back to Dr. Neff's work, where you're saying this is all about your bucket and what is in that bucket and how you are filling it and how you are learning to actually face into the self-compassion. And then, of course, facing into the emotion.
Yes, and facing those uncomfortable discussions that we talked about as well, right?
It's quite dynamic. It
is, and it's spectacular. Like, I love it for so many things, but I think that, there's so many layers to this conversation. We can start with just understanding what are the basic skills that we need. We could spend, you could do an entire PhD on just mindfulness. Many people have, it comes back again to what I was saying earlier, and that is that the research is very, very clear, right? If we practice mindful self-compassion, depression goes down, anxiety goes down, increased self-efficacy goes up, our confidence goes up, we have better interpersonal relationships. It's amazing. The self-loathing goes down, of course. And so we can create, like, little by little, we can create these pockets in society where people are beginning to have these conversations. Like, it's not unusual now to have a conversation like we're having. Yeah. And yet 10 years ago, I don't even think I knew the term mindful self-compassion 10 years ago.
No, I didn't.
So to me, that leaves me hopeful, Lori, it brings me a lot of hope to know that, you're doing a pod talk, that you're so passionate about this, that I'm doing it in my classroom, that I have girlfriends that are teaching it to their children and are life coaches and are doing it with their clients.
Yeah.
I have girlfriends that are vice principals in inner city Surrey who are regularly working one-on-one with families and with children that are traumatized, trying to support them. It brings me a lot of hope that so many more people are so much more trauma informed.
What do we give someone at this key moment here with the few things that we've talked about, just scratching the surface?
Well, I don't know. First, lean into fear. Lean into fear. I have a saying on my desk that says, do one thing every day that scares you. Do one thing every day that scares you. Because if you don't, you're not facing life head on, right? And so, like you said, we are guaranteed uncertainty. Guaranteed. So we cannot, that is the definition of vulnerability. We cannot live a wholehearted life, as Brene Browns says, unless we embrace uncertainty, unless we lean into risk, and unless we have emotional exposure, right? And so how do we do that? We have to build our emotional resilience. We have to build that. And how do we do that? By leaning in, right? There is no way but through, like she says. So to me, that would be one of them, right? Growing empathy within us. We'll grow that empathy within us by practicing mindful self-compassion, by reminding ourselves of common humanity, that we are never alone, that we know that uncertainty is a guarantee. And through this pandemic, it is even more so. But in everyday life, even if there was no pandemic, we're guaranteed of that, right? I like to assume that one of my beliefs is I assume that people's intentions are kind, and I mean, I could spend a whole hour talking about perception and our lenses and how so often people jump to they said this, when really, if you back recorded the conversation and listened to it again, they didn't say it that way with that intention, and yet it's interpreted as a negative statement to the person who felt it, right? And so we can't, when we're so hard on ourselves, we can't hear people, right? We can't actually hear their good intentions. We are so hard on ourselves that when people say something, we think to say, oh, you're wearing that dress, honey? Oh, are you going to put your hair that way? And right away we hear criticism in a statement that maybe had nothing to do with that. Maybe the person who said that to you really, really loved the other dress because green was their favorite color. And nothing to do with what it looks like on you, but it's just green's their favorite color, and the green dress you wear makes them happy because they like green. But we don't see that, right? We get so wrapped up in our own fear that we immediately believe we're being attacked. So learning to find those, the hope and the trust in people. That it's funny, today we had a student, Sam Talk, a student in the Mind Talk, where my kids taught the class. And so it was a Zoom call. There were 8 of us in the class. And she was talking about vulnerability and, will you lean into vulnerability, and how might that look in your life? And one of the boys said, I can see that I really need to work on vulnerability in my life. But he says, I think it's going to take me some time, right? I don't really like the feel of it. And I believe that you have to trust the person before you can be vulnerable with them. And all the rest of the kids going, yeah, you need to trust the person before you can be vulnerable with them. And then I just kind of quietly said, yeah, it's interesting though, right? Because if we wait for trust, if we wait for the perfect moment when we feel like we can trust the person and then we're vulnerable, we may have lost the opportunity to actually forge a good relationship with that person, a real authentic relationship, right? So you need to be brave, right? You need to sometimes just put yourself out there like I'm doing with you today. I'm not an expert in this field by any means. I've learned it just like you've learned it, working hard and reading and being passionate about people and about life and about connections and about kids. But at the end of the day, that's all that matters, is just being brave and taking a risk. And like Brene Browns says, stepping into the arena. I think you have a quote that you were going to finish with today.
I am.
That's beautiful because it's exactly what it is. And so when I listened to that 17-year-old boy say that in my class today, I was like, yeah, I get it. Like, I get what you're saying. But what do you think about this? And he said, after I said that, he said, yeah, I guess I kind of see your point, right? But it's scary, right? So be brave.
Being brave, and being brave with, I think that the tone of this conversation is just the simple awareness of the power of an emotion. No matter how big it is, we want to remember that it's a spectrum, that it has a name, that it's not just anger. There's other words in there.
And that all emotions are acceptable.
That they're all acceptable.
And that they're not directives, but they're just information, right?
And when someone says that is not acceptable, what you're doing is not acceptable, your emotion's not acceptable, really, and this is my opinion, being a mother of multiple children, I've said that before.
Sure, so have I.
And we talked about it after. And I'm saying to my kids, it's not that I am saying you should never feel hatred, but if you have an emotion that's locked in, that's where there's danger, because you can act out of that and you aren't able to connect to your body. You're not able to free flow what sorrow might be saying to you or what sadness might be trying to release. And so when we experience this powerful energy and overwhelming sense within our bodies, and it comes out our mouth and it acts out through our bodies, we've got to remember that there's a spectrum to it, and that we can go back to that, label it, and ask ourselves, why was I feeling like that? Mm-hmm. Connecting in is really one of the steps. Now, the first one that I heard you say is to breathe, and to pull yourself back to ground, to center. Is there anything else that I've said there that needs clarification or that you would want to expound on briefly?
I just want to make sure that people remember that we need to be kind to ourselves and be patient. This is new for a lot of us, and just to take the time to recognize that it takes practice, right? It is a practice. Life is a practice. And so, as I said before, just to be brave, to lean in, to not be, to not shy away from those uncomfortable conversations, and to be patient with ourselves when we make mistakes, and to recognize that self-loathing actually creates the opposite, right? The attacker and the attackee. That was really powerful for me.
Yeah.
Yeah. And like you said, we all make mistakes as parents. I've done the same thing to my kids. That's not okay for you to talk to me like that. That's not, you scream at me or whatever. But the lesson that to be learned is to teach children at a young age how to label their emotions. And then eventually you can get to the point where Dr. Brackett's work leads, which is learning emotional intelligence, self-regulation, awareness, right? Sense of self, sense of others, right? That's what emotional intelligence is the ability to have social relationships, to be self-aware, to know how to self-regulate, and to read others' emotions, right? And unfortunately, in this world of technology, it makes it much more difficult for young people because they don't really always know, right, what people are actually feeling.
Well, right. And we've talked about that. We've talked about that in the teens and technology conversation that we had. But there's what I'm seeing here is what we've done in this first episode is sort of pull everything out of the box.
Yeah.
And then let's work together to start to put things back in the box and take some time to, like you said, examine perception and what our lens actually is. And
I think it would be really helpful too to talk about shame and perfectionism too, because these are two big things that, many of us suffer from, shame and perfectionism for sure. Yeah. I see it a lot in my classroom.
Yeah.
And I mean, belonging, love, connection.
Well, this is going to go on and on, right? And so our listeners can know that we will keep this conversation going. This is a valuable conversation. This is an important conversation. And I don't want to end this conversation in the sense that we are going to come back to this, and we're going to pick up one of those things that you said just a moment ago, and we will decide what we're going to talk about, and then we're going to talk about it, and we're going to drill down really, really deep on it, because, it all begins with this mindful compassion. It's mindful, and it's extending grace to yourself.
Yeah.
And remember something that I think is really important. And as I read this from Daring Greatly by Brene Brown, it's so powerful to me, because when I read this, I went, and I immediately had this vision. Of myself stepping into this ancient arena.
Mm-hmm.
And I immediately could hear these battles going on, of the clanging of swords, and I knew there were horses that come running through this place, and there's blood in the earth, and you can see it. If you're visual, get the vision that this arena, people have gone before. People went before you, Trish. They went before me. They fought this battle about what it means to be human, the power of connection, and what it means to love yourself.
Yeah, absolutely.
And she connects to this, and she says, this is the phrase "daring greatly" is from Theodore Roosevelt's speech, Citizenship in a Republic. And it's often referred to as man in the arena. And as women, we know that we can say the woman in the arena, right?
Of course.
It's for everyone. But for this particular writing, this is what it says. It says, it is not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles, or the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs, who comes up short again and again, because there is no effort without error and shortcoming, but who does actually strive to do the deeds, who knows great enthusiasms, the great devotions, who spends himself in a worthy cause, who at the best knows in the end of the triumph of high achievement, and who at the worst, if he fails, at least he fails while daring greatly.
Beautiful. I love that.
Isn't that?
She speaks that in her Netflix special too there for your listeners. That Netflix special is I think the tour after she wrote Daring Greatly, but it's just so beautiful, right? So much of what she says is the kind of isms that we can all live by. So I'm very eternally grateful to her for her work.
Me too.
Let me tell you.
It's beautiful. And it gives you the sense that you're not alone.
Mm-hmm.
And we're daring. And each one of us in our lifetimes, if you're 12 and you're listening, if you're 18, each one of us in our life has to dare and has to face fear, has to take the risk, and has to say, I'm going to go. I'm going. And
for sure. And without any guarantees. There are no guarantees.
No certainty.
No.
Thank you so much for coming on today. This has been a pleasure. I've been waiting for this, and I'm waiting for this because I get this sense of urgency about raising the conversation and keeping this conversation going. So thank you so much. I know you're coming back, and we have a lot more to say. So thank you. Thank you for taking the time today.
Thank you, Lori. Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure having the conversation with you.